In the cold air of late summer in Alaska, two leaders will sit across from one another for the first time in 6 years. Donald Trump, now in his second term as President of the United States, and Vladimir Putin, the enduring ruler of the Russian Federation. The meeting is framed as a search for peace in Ukraine, but it is also a battlefield in its own right, where words are weapons and every pause, every gesture is measured against the balance of global power. The Alaska Summit comes at a time when the war in Ukraine has reached both a stalemate and a breaking point, a paradox born of 2.5 years of grinding combat and more than a decade of unresolved territorial disputes. For Trump, the meeting is both an opportunity and a risk. For Putin, it is a chance to press advantage without firing a shot. For Ukraine, it is a moment when the very map of its future may be discussed without its full control over the outcome. The roots of this confrontation go back to 2014, when Russian forces moved into Crimea under the cover of unmarked uniforms and political ambiguity and annexed the peninsula in open defiance of international law. The West protested, imposed sanctions, but stopped short of military confrontation. In the same year, the Donbass region, specifically Donetsk and Luhansk, saw the rise of Moscow-backed separatists. The conflict there burned at a low but deadly intensity for 8 long years. Then, in February of 2022, Putin broke the frozen front wide open. Russian armor pushed toward Kyiv. Missiles struck cities far from the front, and the south of Ukraine, including much of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, fell under Russian control. By the autumn of that year, Ukraine had pushed Russian troops back from the gates of its capital and reclaimed portions of occupied land, but the deeper, more entrenched battle lines in the east remained. Now, in the summer of 2025, Russia holds around 1/5 of Ukraine's territory, a vast arc from Luhansk in the northeast to Crimea in the south. In the east, Russian advances are slow, costly, and measured in meters, yet they continue. Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is calling for an unconditional ceasefire, a halt to the bloodletting before the war swallows more lives and towns. But as the Alaska Summit approaches, Trump has introduced a new and controversial term into the diplomatic lexicon: territorial swaps. The idea has sent shockwaves through Kyiv and Europe alike, because every square kilometer under discussion is recognized internationally as part of Ukraine. For Zelensky, ceding any of it would mean conceding the sacrifices of tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. And for Putin, it would validate the strategy of conquest through force. At the core of these talks lie the contested regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. Reports suggest that Putin may demand Ukraine relinquish its remaining control in both oblasts, formalizing Russian possession of areas Ukraine has fought desperately to defend. The political cost in Kyiv would be immense. Beyond that, the battlefields of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson present their own intractable realities. These territories form the land bridge connecting Russia to Crimea, a corridor of strategic depth that Moscow is unlikely to abandon. Any talk of freezing the current lines is, from Ukraine's perspective, a temporary truce in an ongoing occupation. From Moscow's perspective, it is the consolidation of gains. Europe views such swaps at this stage as a non-starter, a dangerous precedent that could embolden other revisionist powers. Yet the timing of battlefield developments suggests a calculated choreography. In the days since the Alaska Summit was announced, Russian forces have pierced Ukrainian lines in select sectors. Small sabotage groups advanced up to 10 kilometers near an important road junction outside the town of Dolya. A modest gain in tactical terms, but one that carries outsized political value. The advances are concentrated in Donetsk Oblast territory Putin prizes most. By pushing forward now, even in limited fashion, Russia strengthens its negotiating hand. The message to Washington is clear. Russia is still moving, still grinding forward, and every shipment of Western arms is merely slowing an inevitable outcome. This narrative is aimed at shaping American public opinion, feeding into arguments that continued aid to Ukraine is a costly exercise with diminishing returns. For Trump, the optics are complex. On one hand, he must project strength in the face of Russian aggression. On the other, he must demonstrate to the American electorate that he can bring wars to a close without endless expenditure of lives and resources. His insistence on exploring territorial arrangements is rooted in the belief that frozen conflicts can be managed, and that an imperfect peace may serve American strategic interests better than an open-ended war. However, the risk is that such a stance could fracture Western unity, embolden Moscow, and leave Kyiv vulnerable to renewed pressure. Trump's approach draws on a realist tradition in American foreign policy, prioritizing tangible outcomes over abstract principles. Whether this will translate into a lasting settlement or merely an interlude in a larger conflict remains uncertain. On the battlefield, Ukraine faces a grim calculus. It is outnumbered in manpower, under constant pressure along multiple fronts, and reliant on Western weapon deliveries that are now politicized in Washington. The piercing of defensive lines in Donetsk, though not catastrophic in itself, hints at the possibility of Russian encirclement of key towns like Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. These urban centers form the heart of Ukraine's defensive belt in the east. Their fall would open the way toward the Dnipro River and threaten the cohesion of Ukrainian defenses in the center of the country. The fact that these advances come now, as diplomats prepare for high-stakes talks in Alaska, reinforces the notion that Moscow is waging both a military and a political offensive simultaneously. History offers sobering parallels. From the Korean Peninsula to the Balkans, negotiations have often been shaped by the state of the front lines at the moment talks begin. Gains on the ground translate into leverage at the table. Putin understands this dynamic intimately. His career has been built on seizing moments when opponents are divided or distracted. For Trump, the challenge is to recognize the difference between a stable compromise and a trap. Any agreement that leaves Ukraine fragmented and militarily weakened could invite further Russian pressure in the future, not only in Ukraine, but in other states along Moscow's periphery. For Europe, the stakes extend beyond borders. On a map, they touch on the credibility of the post-World War II order, in which force is not supposed to redraw sovereign boundaries. As the two presidents prepare to meet, the war in Ukraine is at a strategic inflection point. Neither side can achieve total victory in the near term, yet neither is willing to accept a settlement that undermines its core objectives. Russia seeks to legitimize territorial gains and secure a geopolitical buffer against NATO. Ukraine seeks to restore its territorial integrity and ensure its long-term security. The United States seeks to balance these goals against domestic priorities and the shifting landscape of great power competition. In Alaska, every sentence will be weighed not only for its immediate meaning, but for the signals it sends to allies, adversaries, and the millions watching beyond the room. In the end, the Alaska Summit is less about ending a single war and more about defining the terms of competition between major powers in the 21st century. Whether it produces a ceasefire, a roadmap to negotiations, or merely another chapter in a long and frozen conflict, it will be remembered as a test of leadership under pressure. For Trump, it is a chance to demonstrate that American influence can still shape outcomes in Eurasia. For Putin, it is an opportunity to show that Russia, despite economic sanctions and battlefield losses, can force the world to treat its conquests as negotiable facts. And for Ukraine, it is a reminder that in geopolitics, survival often depends not only on the courage of soldiers in the field, but on the resolve of those who speak for them at the table.